So it is that time again. Cern Basher is back with us, and he says he's going to somehow improve on last week, which was hard to improve on, Cern.
Well, we're getting pretty good at this, aren't we, Randy? You are getting amazing at predicting my next slide.
I've been trying, I try to zen out or something.
You're like the large language model that predicts the next word. You do that with slides.
I guess.
I think these AI companies should study your brain to figure out how you do it.
Well, people have been talking about studying my brain since I was very small, but I'm not sure if they had the same, intent. Anyway, all right.
For different reasons, Randy, for different reasons.
Different reasons.
All right, well, let's get right to it. We've got some great stuff today. First of all, I wanted to start with, Cybertruck.
Okay, now this one is pretty good.
Yeah, this is not mine.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I forget the person that posted this on X. I apologize to that person.
Yeah.
But this was a great shot. I think it was shared pretty widely on X if people haven't seen it.
Yeah, that's pretty sharp.
And then, of course, it was exciting on Wednesday to see the Starship take off. And these are some photos that SpaceX shared, and incredible.
Yeah.
As it's taking off. Too bad we didn't get to see it get caught by the 𝐄𝐦𝐚𝐲, but maybe next time.
Yeah, the thing I was waiting for, I thought that they could have done, I don't know why not, would have been, in sequence, maybe in a separate frame, reactions by President Trump. They could have had a separate camera for that. I was kept waiting for that.
Yeah, the Trump cam or something, right? That would have been fun. Yeah. I thought this was kind of neat. I saw this today, kind of the size comparison between the shuttle and the top of the Starship, the Starship part, not the booster.
Just the ship, yeah.
Just the ship, compared to Dragon capsule there on the left.
Oh, yeah.
A human, a little figure there,
yeah.
under the nose of Starship, and then a Cybertruck, of course. So it got me wondering how many Cybertrucks you could fit inside a Starship.
Oh, I see.
And how many humanoid bots?
I see. And I think your brain's going to need, dissection and figuring out here.
Yeah, that could be scary. The other thing I thought was interesting is the Starship's booster produces as much thrust as 66 Boeing 747s. That's pretty phenomenal.
That's pretty amazing.
Didn't know that. I knew it was a powerful rocket, but that gives me some understanding I didn't have before.
I did see something this morning on X on the thrust of, I think it was a plaid, how many seconds a banana would be held up against the seat. Did you see that one?
No.
So it took a quarter mile. If you put a banana up against the seat and slam the accelerator, no, that's not. Anyway, it gave it full thrust. The banana would hang there in the seat for a quarter mile, and then finally fall down off the backrest.
There would be a lot of minions that would be excited to test that. Yeah, interesting. Here's some good news. The FAA has given SpaceX permission to launch up to 25 per year.
Yes.
Up from the current limit of 5.
Yes.
So maybe we will get to Mars eventually anyway, after all.
Yes.
Although I think Elon wants to launch more than 25 Starships in order to get to Mars. He's talking about a fleet of 1,000 of them.
Right. But I think next year, 25 would probably be within reason for the experiments and then, starting to put some payloads up.
Yeah. I'm not so good at math, but I think that's about 2 a month.
Yeah, I mean, you consider they're putting up, I think, 130, 140 of the existing ships this year.
Yeah.
Falcons, I think the Falcon 9s, combined of the various models, I think about 130, 140. So that's probably, I'm not sure if they have a higher goal, but that's probably a good goal.
Interesting. Yeah, that's going to be great. And then I thought this was interesting. Brett Winton asked Elon thoughts on the payload. And Elon's response was Cybertrucks and Optimus robots. So, Randy, when you and I put our model together last week, and in your case, the Randy Kirk Tesla valuation model, the
Yes,
𝐷𝐚𝐬𝐝 model, it rolls off the tongue very easily, doesn't it?
just does. Yeah.
Yeah. We didn't really consider the off-planet uses of Cybertruck or Optimus, did we?
We didn't. We didn't consider that at all.
So I think that makes your model even more conservative than it was.
Yes, yes.
And so since our discussion last week, I have done some further work on the model,
I see.
and I have some interesting learnings for you today.
Okay.
So we're going to use your numbers again, and as a reminder to the viewers, here is the valuation that your assumptions came up to is about $3,000 a share.
Correct.
Okay, and
Right now, today.
present value today of Tesla shares $3,000.
Right.
Using the assumptions that you had in your model.
Yes.
Not my assumptions, your assumptions.
Right.
So, and here are the numbers for the 7 different business lines that we modeled.
Mm-hmm.
This is showing the potential profit year by year, basically modeling out from 2025 to 2035. So 11 years of projections.
Right.
And you've got profit 18 billion next year, growing up to about 2.5 trillion. Okay, by
Yep.
2035.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So one of the things you can see here is Optimus, obviously, is the vast majority of this.
Right.
So I just wanted to remind the viewers kind of what your Optimus assumptions were. You have production of humanoid robots starting in 2026, 100,000 in that year.
Mm-hmm.
And so that goes into this cumulative bots deployed column, 100,000. Next year, you're adding 1 million. So now we have 1.1 million. 4 million gets you to 5.1, et cetera. So you've got 208 million Optimus robots by 2035.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And so about 2 trillion in profit. And if you just did a rough PE ratio on that, 50 at that point would be $100 trillion business just in robots.
Okay.
All right. So I want everybody just to keep that in the back of their mind. And also I wanted to reshare this chart again that shows that for every auto you produce, you can probably produce about 20 bots.
Right.
Right. So the numbers that we have for Optimus deployments year by year compared against your auto delivery numbers, it's about 12% of your auto deliveries. So even the numbers you have are not really that aggressive when you compare it to Tesla's capabilities of producing cars.
Right.
Okay. And I would argue that there's probably some upside there to those numbers in these later years where Tesla could produce a lot more than what you estimated.
Right.
And you had 50 million, by the way, in 2035 being produced. And that's only 12% equivalent in auto production terms.
Right.
Okay. All right. All right. And then one last thing is a reminder, these were the earnings per share numbers that came out of your assumptions from the model. 491 next year up to 549 in 2035.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Over the last week, I've done some work in terms of refining the model and looking at different time periods. And I ran numbers out 100 years, 80 years, 60 years, 40 years, and 20 years. And it turns out that modeling 40 to 60 years is kind of the sweet spot. No need to go to 100 years. No need to go to 80 years. 60 years is pretty good. Okay. So here are your numbers extended out 60 years.
Okay.
And you can see that this steep rise to 2035, and then we assumed a flat line terminal rate of growth. Okay.
Uh-huh. Yep.
And then here's the present value of all that. And what's interesting is even though you've got long-term growth of the earnings, the present value of each of those years' earnings is less and less and less because your discount rate is higher than your growth rate.
Right.
The rate at which you're bringing those earnings back to the present is higher than what you're assuming the earnings will grow. So the earnings aren't reaching any kind of escape velocity. They're getting pulled back by the gravitational force of your discount rate.
Yes.
All right. I call this the earnings mountain.
Okay.
All right. I promise you we're getting somewhere.
I hear you. I hear you.
All right. Here is, if we do that, the net profit just over the next 40 years. Okay. And so in the next few years, you can barely register the numbers on the chart. This here by, sorry, waiting for that to disappear below, by 2030, by 2044 is about 5 trillion in annual profit. And then we get to 10 trillion, 15, and then over 20 trillion. Just to put, you know, there's been no company in history that have produced that level of profits.
Yeah,
Not even close.
I think Apple right now is or has been roughly the largest profit maker at something over $100 billion a year. So it's hard to call whether NVIDIA could pass that or if Apple's going to add to that, but that's roughly, I always talk about profits in terms of how many apples or
That's
what
right.
percentage of an apple.
It's a good way to think about it, right? It's like looking at SpaceX in terms of how many 747s. That's a
Right.
frame of reference that most of us get.
Right.
Same thing with Apple. Yep, that's a good idea. Okay. When you have profit as a company, you can do several things with it. One thing that you can do with profit is you can buy other companies. We're assuming that Tesla doesn't, at least on any material level.
Right.
Okay. You can reinvest in your business, right? You can build more plants, more factories, and Tesla will need to do that. They will also need to continue to reinvest in their compute, right? These massive computing centers that they have, they'll have to continue to invest in that.
Right.
Those two are CAPEX.
Yep.
Okay. Also, as their business grows, they will have to invest in some other assets. Inventories and things like that will grow along with the size of their revenues.
Mhm.
Okay. The difference between profit and then all that we just said is free cash flow. Free cash flow is what the company has after it invests in itself. Right? And the beautiful thing about free cash flow is you can let it accumulate, you can pay a dividend, or you can buy back stock.
Right.
Okay, those are kind of the three main things.
Mhm.
Warren Buffett has let his cash accumulate,
Mhm.
and he has some massive amount of cash on his balance sheet earning next to nothing.
Right.
Other companies, as we'll see in a minute, have chosen to buy back stock and pay dividends.
Mhm.
And I'll show you sort of what that's done. All right, so let's think about that then, what that might look like for Tesla over this 40-year period.
Okay.
Okay, so here is the same earnings, but I split it out between what's CapEx in red and what's left over as free cash flow. And you can see that with my assumption that 30% of their earnings every year is required to be spent, reinvested as CapEx.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it is free cash flow. Now, right now, CapEx as a percent of earnings is much higher than that. But Tesla right now is in a very heavy investment phase that should diminish over time. And so I think my 30% assumption over 40 years is pretty reasonable. It's probably a lot less in the out years, and it's probably a little bit more in the early years.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yeah. Yeah. We get into that law of large numbers again, where it almost becomes impossible to invest that much.
This is over $5 trillion out here, Randy.
That's right. Right.
Right? That's a lot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, of course, it's future valued money, so money is not worth as much out there, but still.
Yes. Right.
Still. Yeah. Okay. Now let's look at if they chose to buy back stock.
Okay.
Okay. They've got all this free cash, right? Right. We've got in this case here, let's say 23 trillion, and we're spending about 6 or maybe 7 trillion on CapEx. You've got a decent chunk of money to do something else with. And let's assume that they take 50% of that free cash flow and buy back stock.
Mm-hmm.
So in this year here, in this out year, 40 years from now, it's $8 trillion. In the early years, it's much less. Okay. What's the impact to our valuation when we do that? Okay. Before we answer that question, let me give you a visual. This is what our assumptions were for the growth of Tesla's shares outstanding over the next 40 years.
Oh,
They
okay.
have 3.5 billion shares now,
Mhm.
and we assumed annual dilution of about 2.25% every year. So it would get them over 8 billion shares.
And most of that would be going to employees or things of that nature.
That's right. Yeah. Stock options, restricted stock,
Right.
payments to employees, etc. Yep. The Elon's compensation plan, potentially, if there's another one. Sure. Now, the share count may not increase year by year by this
Mhm.
number. The chart might look more lumpy than this. But still, over a long period of time, we expect to be diluted a little bit in our share ownership. So if Tesla bought back stock with 50% of their free cash flow, we turn this chart into this one.
Hmm.
And basically, you more or less end up with the same shares outstanding 40 years from now as we have today.
Mhm.
Okay. So if you think about for a second what that means is we've got earnings growth. And instead now of expecting more shares outstanding, now we have less. And so the earnings per share is that much higher.
Right.
And therefore the value per share would be higher too.
Sure.
Okay. And now the question is how much?
Yeah.
Any guess, Randy, on if Tesla uses 50% of their cash flow
Right.
to buy back stock every year for the next 40 years, although it doesn't start until 2 years from now. I assume for the first couple of years, no free cash flow is being reinvested.
Sure.
And then they start to use 50% of their free cash flow for the remaining 38 years.
Mhm. Mhm.
The share count remains the same. Your present value number in the base case, where this 2.25% dilution was $3,000 a share, what do you think the present value per share is under this scenario?
Yeah, I jokingly said the other day in a comment when somebody asked me a very simple math question, I don't know calculus.
This is a
Um,
complex math
this
question.
is a complex math question. So any guess that I would make would be, more than 3,000.
Brilliant, Randy. Brilliant answer. You're right. It's 4,328.
Okay.
It's a 40% increase.
Okay.
So if Tesla can use half of their free cash flow to buy back stock
Mhm.
over the next 40 years, but not starting until 2 years from now, they would reduce their share count from an expected 8.7 billion shares down to less than 4, 56% reduction in the number of shares outstanding.
Right.
Okay. And their stock price, the present value of those earnings today would go up to 4,300 and change
Okay.
if that was our expectation.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, this is really interesting. If they don't do that, if they held all their cash and didn't buy back any shares,
Right.
they would be expected to have about $200 trillion of cash on their balance sheet. Okay, that makes Warren Buffett look like a poor man,
Yeah. 200.
right? Warren Buffett has 375 billion. I mean, that's a rounding error in this number. Okay, and this is in 2064.
Okay.
Okay, 40 years from now.
Yeah.
And interestingly, even if Tesla uses half of their free cash flow to buy back stock,
Mhm.
they would still have 100 trillion in cash at that point. So this is not like they're giving all their cash away and they don't have any cash left. Okay. So what I did then was run a couple of other scenarios where they buy back stock with 70% of their free cash and 90%.
I see. I see. Okay.
That increases the present value numbers even more, 5,000 and 6,300. And the cash here in this scenario at 90% free cash flow for buybacks, well, they would end up with about $20 trillion in cash still.
And imagine I'm imagining the opposite side, which is the amount that they would have bought back, the people that would have been enriched. Uh,
That's right.
with the-
Yeah. And the neat thing about buybacks is it kind of puts a floor under the stock price a little bit and
Sure.
reduces volatility,
Mhm.
right? And we see that with Apple, we see that with Microsoft, we're starting to see that a little bit with Nvidia. whenever the stock drops, companies and they're buying back stock. It just helps support the stock a little bit.
Sure.
Now, another interesting thing here is the present value of the cash balance per share in 2064. And I'm sorry, we're just waiting for that. Yeah, there we go. If I move that, it's going to move. I can't drag the cursor down to the green boxes. I'll just have to direct you there. In this scenario where they don't buy stock back, the present value per share of that 199 trillion is $245. Okay, on 8.7 billion shares.
I see.
If we go all the way to the other side, the present value per share on the 1.6 billion shares that remain is $233. So the cash per share is similar under all these scenarios within $100 or so
Right.
of each, or $60. So that I found that to be interesting, that because you're reducing the share count so much on a cash per share basis, it's very similar.
Yeah.
Okay. Before somebody says, "Hey, Cern, this is crazy, never going to happen." Well, let's look at history. Here's Microsoft. Microsoft in the last quarter had free cash flow of 19 billion. Okay, the numbers aren't in the trillions like they may be for Tesla, but just here we are today with Microsoft. Okay, a lot of free cash flow pretty much every single quarter. There are a few quarters where it's more or less than the rest. Okay, here is Microsoft's share count over the last 30 years or so. You can see that beginning in the mid 2000s, they really started to buy back shares in earnest.
Yeah.
And they've reduced their share count from over 11 billion shares now down to 7.5 billion. Okay. Their stock has gone from 300 billion to over 3 trillion in that time period. And of course, this certainly helps the earnings per share growth as well.
Sure.
Okay. And here is Microsoft's cash balance. It's grown over the time period. Now they've also made acquisitions. Like there's other things going on here, right? They haven't just sat on their cash. Okay, so that's them. Here's Apple. 24 billion of free cash flow in the last quarter. And it's been as high as 44 billion in some of the good quarters. Okay. And they have also bought back a lot of stock. Their share count's been reduced from about 26.5 billion shares down to 15 billion shares.
Wow.
Okay. And this company over this time period I think the market cap's increased from 400 billion up to whatever it is now, 3.5 trillion. Something like that, right?
Yep.
Okay. And here's Apple's cash balance now, $65 billion. So the companies are doing this already. Here's NVIDIA. This is, I think, a sign of things to come for Tesla at some point. NVIDIA has 19 billion of profit in this latest quarter that was reported last night, 55% margin. And by the way, in your model, we didn't model margins like that.
Right.
Right? Nothing even close. So what's NVIDIA now going to do with the cash that they're building? Here's the free cash flow for NVIDIA, 13 billion. This was the prior quarter, not as of last night.
Sure.
And then here's their cash balance now at 34 billion. Well, NVIDIA has started to buy back stock. And unfortunately, I didn't actually print that, but they've started to make a little dent in their shares outstanding. Okay. Now compare that with Tesla. Tesla's free cash flow was very negative in the early years as they're building the business. They've been free cash flow positive in recent years. There was a quarter, 3 quarters ago where they weren't. Right. In Q1 of this year. They're not yet really at the point where they can afford to be buying back stock. They need this capital to grow the business. Right. So Tesla is earlier in its life cycle than Microsoft and Apple is. But I think it's coming. Here's their current cash buildup. And this is great. 33 billion is a fantastic number. Okay. And here is by projection, or the model's projection, your projection actually, because these are your numbers, the cash growth in 40 years would be, $100 trillion.
Right.
Even if you assume they buy back stock with 50% of their free cash flow.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that these numbers just seem, outrageous. But the numbers are based on Elon's own statements of what he believes is going to happen. The robotaxi numbers are confirmed by Cathie Wood's analysis, and whatever anybody thinks about ARK Invest as a company capable of making good investments in the markets, I don't think anybody doubts their capability to do research. And so their research indicates that the robotaxi business will be worth, trillions of dollars shortly. And then Elon says on top of that Optimus will be worth multiples of what robotaxi is.
Yep. Yep. And let's say that you take your numbers and you say, you know what, Randy, I think you're so optimistic. I'm going to cut your numbers in half. Okay. I don't think that, but some might.
Yes, some might.
So in the scenario where there are no stock buybacks, the present value then per share is about $1,500.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh darn.
Interestingly, if you get to 90% buybacks, you're back to your $3,000 present value again.
I see.
Right. So that's interesting. And this, you can see the stock price, the present value is sensitive to your assumptions about what Tesla might do with their cash.
Right.
Okay. In the case of what I'm calling the half Randy model, Tesla would end up with, 100 trillion of cash if no stock buybacks. At some point, you probably do have to return some of that to shareholders. There'd be a lot of pressure from a lot of different shareholders to receive some of that capital back.
Sure.
Right. Not many people are like Warren Buffett, where they just continue to hoard the money.
Right.
Right. Not many companies can do that. Okay. Now let's say, okay, Randy, fine. But you know what? I don't think Optimus is going to happen. It's just not progressing well enough. Let's ignore Optimus. Okay. So now I'm back to the full Randy model, but I'm getting rid of Optimus. Okay. So we have a present value of 500 a share.
Mm.
And if you factor in 90% of the free cash for stock buybacks, you're at 1,000 a share. No Optimus.
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Not bad.
Okay. And 30 trillion of cash 40 years from now.
Right.
All right. How about no Optimus, no robotaxi? None of this AI stuff's going to work. Get rid of it all. Present value of 450 and the 90% stock buyback scenario with the free cash, you're at 850. Present value today of Tesla's business.
Yeah.
Modeling out their earnings just over 60 years. In other words, we're saying Tesla goes bankrupt in year 61.
Right.
Right? There's no terminal value here. I modeled 60 years of earnings and then nothing. Okay. We included dilution of 2.25% per year. We included long-term growth rate at 8% only, and a discount rate of 12%.
Right.
No Optimus, no robotaxi gets you to 450 a share today. So I don't know when Wall Street will wake up to this, maybe never, and that's fine. But it speaks to the long-term opportunity that is present in Tesla if they can execute.
Right. And I don't want to take a risk of getting a wrong prediction, but have you thought about a model like this, but with dividends instead of with buybacks?
Well, the thing about dividends is it's cash out the door, but it doesn't reduce share count.
Right.
So from a valuation perspective, buybacks are actually better for the company than dividends.
Right.
Now, in the scenario here, let's just go back to the half Randy scenario here. You still have, let's say you do 50% of the free cash flows for buybacks, you still have 50 trillion in cash. There's plenty of room to be paying dividends.
Right.
So that's on top of this. To me, dividends don't necessarily increase the valuation. but it gives other investors reason to buy the stock.
The other thought is that our model does not have anything for the return on all of that cash that's sitting in the bank.
Right.
So at a certain point, what do you think? What do you see over the years? When does Warren Buffett get more than 5% for his cash pile?
No,
He doesn't. Okay.
no.
So he either goes with treasuries or
Yep.
money markets
Yep.
or whatever. He can get around the same that we can get.
That's right. Super safe investments. Yeah, there's no volume, usually volume discounts, there's no volume benefit for him.
I see. Okay.
Yep. So you're right. That makes these numbers here where there's no stock buybacks pretty conservative because there is some additional earnings on the cash.
Especially if you bought Bitcoin.
Well, that's a whole nother argument. Yeah, and Michael Saylor actually was talking about Warren Buffett just the other day and saying that he's a fool for holding so much cash. That his cost of capital is higher than the return on the cash.
Yeah.
Therefore, he's destroying shareholder value by holding so
Yeah,
much cash.
absolutely. Well, he's not the first one to make that argument about somebody, holding cash.
Yeah.
Uh, so, Elon, of course, famously put some money into Bitcoin a few years back. Microsoft apparently is in conversations right now to put some of theirs into Bitcoin. So it's not a new story, but I guess especially for a company like Tesla, keeping your powder dry when you're currently in kind of a hyper growth mode where you might need that money to take
Yeah.
advantage of a real opportunity, I suppose makes sense.
It does. It does. And they're in a heavy investment phase and they will be for some time. Yeah. It's okay. I would not be pressuring Tesla to be doing any stock buybacks.
Right.
Okay. If those numbers don't excite you, then you're probably feeling like this guy on the left. And in that case, I'm sorry. Some people are just bearish.
Yeah, that's true. It's true.
Yeah. Um, Investing is a lot like dodgeball. You have to keep your eye on the ball and your head on a swivel. So we know that.
Yes.
All right. This is a good one. This translates to your last comment. I'm very sorry, Mr. Smith. It appears you don't own Bitcoin. He's sitting there with the doctor, and the doctor's giving him his diagnosis.
Diagnosis. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got some great Bitcoin cartoons this week. Here's a couple of kids with the name escapes me now, the box, the Jack in the Box.
Take the box, yes.
Thank you. And they've wound it up and it's opened and the kids are looking sky high and he says, "Yeah, Bitcoin."
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, as long as you're bringing up Bitcoin, and I admit that I brought it up first. I have told the folks on X that I've picked up the book. I finally got the book. I mean, I didn't get it. I was given the book months ago, and I finally decided to start reading it last night. I've read few chapters already, and on X, I'm going to throw out my observations as I learn. So it'll be kind of like if the folks on X, and I'll do it here too. I'll do it on YouTube as well. I'll put in a few notes from time to time on my regular programming about what I've just learned as I begin this journey. And therefore, those who might be like me, who have just a smidgen of a thought of what Bitcoin's about and are worried that it's a Ponzi scheme and et cetera, all the kinds of things that have been talked about, I'm not going to try to persuade people one way or the other. I'm just going to provide my learnings. And I also suggested on Cern that I would be possibly looking to you, even on a weekly basis, where I might have a question or might want to throw one of my new concepts by you to see how you feel about what my learnings are.
Absolutely. I'd be happy to assist you in that regard. You're on quite a journey. I went on the same journey myself, and I first approached Bitcoin with that belief that it was a Ponzi scheme and that it was useless and worthless.
Right.
So what you're doing actually is kind of an important concept in the Bitcoin world known as proof of work. You're
Right,
going to show everybody as you go through proof of your work, of your time that you're spending studying it.
right.
And that's exactly the same thing that the Bitcoin network relies on in a
Yeah.
different way, but same concept.
Yes.
And as you go through that and learn about that, I think you'll find that quite fascinating.
Yeah,
Now,
I've already certainly been reading about proof of work. The other thing I've been learning uh, was about that a cow can be money.
yes,
I've learned that a cow can be money, and that reminds me of an old story. And the old story was, the guy had a cow and he needed money, so he sold it to his neighbor for $1,000. And his neighbor said he was very happy with the decision. But a while later, this guy missed his cow. So he went back to his neighbor and said, "Look, I'd like to buy the cow back. I've got $1,000." The guy says, "No, no, 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 it's going to be $1,500."
hmm
Well, so he gave him the $1,500 and he took the cow home. And after a while, he again ran into a money problem. He went back to the neighbor and the neighbor said, "Well, I'll buy it back for $1,500." Anyway, this went back and forth and back and forth. And finally, one day, one of these guys went to the other one and he wasn't willing to sell. There was no chance that there was going to be a sale. And this guy was like, "What am I going to do? I was counting on this for my retirement." So I think this is kind of the foundation piece of my journey about Bitcoin is money is what everybody agrees that it is.
Exactly.
And as soon as everybody, and as soon as the zeitgeist, as soon as the culture, as soon as the community, even if it's a community of 12 people or two people, decides that the thing that they've been calling money is no longer money, then
Yeah.
it isn't.
And it's interesting because this chart, I think, is a great one. In the top part of this, if you compare the dollar to Bitcoin,
Mhm.
the dollar looks flat and Bitcoin goes up with volatility,
Right.
right? But really what's happening, if you change your frame of reference to a Bitcoin denominated world,
Okay.
the Bitcoin is staying flat
I see. Yeah. Yeah.
and the dollar is depreciating. And when you start to look at the world through the lens of the bottom chart, that's when things start to click.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because the dollar, there's an unlimited supply of dollars.
Right.
Therefore, they're being devalued all the time,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? We tend to think of the dollar being, rock solid. This is legal tender. This is, worth a dollar. But the problem is it buys less and less and less all the time.
If there are more and more and more of them.
Yeah, which there is. We keep printing money to be even beyond the inflation rate.
Yes.
The level of debasement is higher than the inflation rate.
Right.
So this is a key concept that's worth understanding, and particularly as you get on this journey of understanding what Bitcoin is, look at it through the lens of this lower chart.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Um, Here's another way it's kind of fun. On the left is the Bitcoin price year by year and the changes. And so, this year it's up 122% when Bitcoin was at 94,000. That was just yesterday.
Right.
Okay. Today I might have to update
97,
this chart.
98.
Yeah. And let's see what Bitcoin is right now. 97 and change. So sorry, this chart's out of date already.
Already, yes.
But Bitcoin is up 31 million percent since inception.
Right.
And that sounds crazy, right? How can something be up 31 million percent? Well, on the right side of this chart, I modeled out our bot growth potential
Mm,
that we have. Okay. And you could recognize those numbers. You go down, you'll see 208 million. That's the number that you have in your model, Randy.
right, right, right.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I think in this case I've got my years wrong. That was 2035. I've got 2037 on this table. I
Okay.
must have messed it up somehow. Um, but look at the bot growth. That actually will grow faster than Bitcoin has.
Wow.
Now we're comparing apples and oranges here. Like one's a value of something and one is
Yes,
a number of something.
yes.
But the Bitcoin growth is not something that's so crazy that it doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
We're going to see this kind of growth in other areas too.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, it's funny, I didn't expect that you'd want to talk about Bitcoin today, but look at that. I was prepared, Randy.
You were just Johnny on the spot.
Yeah. I'm just as you predict the charts, I'm starting to predict what you're thinking. It's a scary thought. All right, let's shift to something a little more fun.
All right.
This is a sign that maybe we're at a market top. Some college students, it says, especially in the southern U.S. I think it's funny that the New York Times would, point to people in the South, are hiring interior designers to make over their dorm rooms, and they or their parents are willing to pay thousands. Tuition, 9,400. Dorm room interior designer, $10,000.
Wow.
And Amy Nixon here says, we didn't hike rates enough, did we?
Oh,
Um, so that's a little random. I thought that was funny. All
that
right,
is
let's end with some Cybertrucks, Randy.
okay. All right. Okay.
Here's the new tunnel from the factory in Texas over to the area that I forget what it's called, but where they stage the vehicles and they ship them out.
Right.
Factory under the highway. So here's I wasn't sure if a Cybertruck would fit through a boring tunnel, but here's evidence it does.
I understand that Hamas is, yeah, trying to put together a deal with a boring company for tunnels.
Is that right? All right. Well, yeah, it's unlikely to happen in my opinion, but who knows? Yeah. It's a lot of organizations that could benefit from tunnels, but Hamas wouldn't be at the top of my list in terms of potential sales candidates. All right. This is proof that even turtles love the Cybertruck. This is actually a photo that I took.
Oh,
I had a visitor at my front porch the other day, and he was very intrigued at my Cybertruck, even though it was a scaled down model I
yes.
put in front of him. Yeah. You see he's sticking his neck out there a little bit.
I can see.
By the way, Randy, the turtle's name is Ford.
Ford. Oh,
Waiting,
like on
waiting for the joke to sink in.
yeah. I got the first level of the joke, and then when you were saying that, I got the second level of the joke.
There you go. I'm very patient as a joke teller. I wait. Sometimes I wait days for the jokes to sink in.
So you're saying that the acceleration of this turtle, the would not plaster a banana against its shell or something.
Not the turtle, but the Cybertruck might. All right, and this to finish on a high note. This is from Cybercraft in Switzerland
Hmm,
with this truck in front of one of the famous Swiss dams.
I see.
Beautiful shot.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is a place actually where there's an Australian YouTube channel. They go up there and they drop stuff off the top of the dam and see how far they can fly certain objects.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, they have a lot of fun doing that. Hopefully, there's no Cybertruck below when they do that.
Right. Yes.
All right, Randy, that brings us to an end of the fun and games
That's
today.
it. That's it, huh? Okay. So we're going to be rich. It's just a matter of when.
Well, no, there's no guarantee of that for sure. But and
You had to
one of the
say,
big challenges of being rich is the mental game associated with it.
sure.
A lot of people like to trade assets, Randy,
Yes.
like your story about the cow.
Yes.
And might it not be better just to hold the cow,
Maybe. Maybe.
particularly if it's a cash cow, Randy?
You don't have a picture. You don't have a joke for that. You don't have a.
Well, I wasn't prepared for the cow. If you could have messaged me before the show, I could have prepared for that. Um, Particularly if you have a cash cow, Randy, you don't want to sell it. Not investment advice, but hold on to
Yeah.
those cash cows.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things we're doing on X right now, I know you've been also checking me out on that portion of what we're doing, is kind of contemplating what all of this really means. Like what is wealth? When is wealth enough? When do we have enough? What does enough even mean? Means different things to different people. And then I started with something this morning where we're talking about, when you have more than enough and you start giving it away to your children and grandchildren, do you do more harm than good, was my question.
Mm.
So that's being discussed right now.
Yeah, no, those are some big questions. And I got to tell you, as a financial advisor doing this for 30 years, we have seen the good and the bad on those things.
Yeah.
Often good intentions end up with results that were not what they could have imagined.
Right, right.
And that is painful and difficult to see.
Mhm,
But at the end of the day, you have to do something with your money.
mhm.
And the choices that people make around that are interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think X is such a phenomenal place to really
Mhm.
play that game, if you will. You get a lot of people that are similarly situated,
Yep.
who get a chance to listen to other people's experiences and or ideas about it, throw up their own and see what sticks and what doesn't. Unlike some other forums which are more, I don't know, narrow in terms of their reach, the reach on X is massive and provides for a really good opportunity for this kind of stuff.
Who knew a free speech platform could be so helpful?
What a concept. All right, Cern, as always, we appreciate you coming on and giving us a chart view, a beautiful pictorial version of all the numbers which might otherwise drive us crazy if they're just numbers. And in fact, I get comments all the time from people saying, Randy, we need more charts from you. And I don't do charts, Cern, which is why I'm glad that you come around on Thursdays and help us understand some of this stuff.
Yeah, and just so you know, when I'm having conversations with my wife and kids, I'm not presenting charts. This is
You're
just
not.
just in this venue, Randy, that I do this.
Well, on that note, thank you again. And to all of you out there, it's been great talking to you.